Tonight is another one of those really interesting topics. When Richmond reached out to me a few weeks ago, and this was sort of pre his online program, so he was in the planning phase. He said, look, this is what I do. This is something I think would be really beneficial. If you read the blurb to athletes, to young people, to older people, people with anxiety, people just looking to improve their general well-being. So Richmond was a boarder from Don Valley, and finished in, as he mentioned a moment ago, our centenary year of 1988. And good typical old Zav, or typical Zav, was a prefect, played cricket, was the captain of the cricket, had a couple of APS football premierships when Xavier used to win those, received academic awards, and was the epitome of a Xavier boarder. However, he was struggling with internal pressures that he didn't even realise he had. He went on to study physio, and if you're a parent, many of us, our children aspire to physiotherapy. It's a tough course to get into, and did that. Went on, and it wasn't until in his 30s, with injuries and pain that was stopping him doing the things that he really loved, that he started this journey that has taken him to TRE and managing stress and anxiety. So again, welcome to everyone. Thank you so much, Richmond. Take it away.
Thank you, Davina, and just the acknowledgement. Really appreciative of the chance to make the connection and present myself and a bit of my story and that sort of thing. So I do want to just start by acknowledging the land that we're all on. I'm in Don Valley, which is in Wurundjeri country. I did actually grow up in country Victoria, up near Mooroopna in Shepparton. And look, I don't want to talk too much about myself, but part of the reason in sharing that story was, as Davina said, when I first went to school, I was, excelling at cricket, sport, academics, and all that sort of thing. And I literally kind of went off the rails towards the end of year 11. And, lots of it was about just the intensity and stress of being in the boarding house. And I don't know if you've ever seen the film Lord of the Flies, where it was a little bit like that. The way we used to interact was, we called it ragging. We didn't call it bullying. We called it ragging. And basically what happened is, within the first few weeks, whatever was your most sensitive, sensitive area of your life, that became your nickname. And that was pretty much what you got called. So you just were constantly getting, attacking each other and trying to wound each other. It was just kind of the way we interacted, with very little, adult male supervision and modelling. And so I kind of spent 4 years in absolute hypervigilance. I didn't know it at the time. I was just sort of stressed, and I didn't even really know what was happening. But I became very rebellious. I stopped studying. I hardly did any study in year 12. I was sharing a single room or a double room with my partner in my boarding house, which was Simon Brushfield. We had a big bust up early in the first couple of months of the year, and we shared that room, which is the size for 2 beds, 2 cupboards and 2 desks. We didn't talk to each other for the rest of the year. So it was just this incredibly intense time. And I remember, many of you might remember brother Ian Cribb, that I was really, really close to in my early years of 9, 10 and 11. And I can still picture standing outside what was the head office then, and he pulled me aside and he just said, I don't know what's going on with you, but you really need to pull your head in. And I look back at that conversation now and go, it was a behavioural kind of approach, whereas, I wonder what would have happened if you had to come and said, gee, mate, something's really going on. What's going on that's really making you this, bringing about this change? And one of the other sort of major experiences I had was, I hadn't been back to Xavier because Xavier was some of the best and the worst times of my life. And I went back to I think it was our 30-year reunion, and I hadn't really been back there. I'd kind of stayed away from the community, and I'd left most of my Xavier friends. I've only got 1 or 2 that only sort of stayed in touch because of being at university. But we went back to the boarding house. We organised a boarders reunion. It was the first time, and we got together, and it was amazing. I sort of instantly went back into that sense of, I'm a bit nervous. Who's going to say what? Who's going to hang shit on me? Who's going to do whatever? And as I walked around the school, I had lots and lots of, really sad and intense memories of just being in such a stressed state. And then I remember everyone else wanted to go off to the pub and go and have a drink and do whatever. And I said, I just want to walk around for a bit longer. And I walked down onto the Roach Oval. And I went out and I stood out at the cricket pitch because I was captain of the cricket. And I just stood there and I felt at peace. And I was like, this was my sanctuary. This was the only place where I felt I was in control. I was the captain of the team. I was competent. I was good. And that was literally like my sanctuary for my 4 years at school. And a fascinating link was my partner had been talking and had heard about Wayne Carey talking about his life. And he said, you know, when he was playing football, that was like a sanctuary for him. He felt in control. And then outside it, everything else was stressful. And if you've seen him recently on the Full Monty, you know, this guy who's got amazing skills, amazing talents, incredibly internally stressed and nervous and anxious, but potentially not necessarily recognizing it, or, you know, not much we can do about it. So that was a really fascinating experience. And then what hit me even more was then I went to the reunion that night with all the day boys, most of whom I hadn't seen, and I was quite excited and nervous, and a mix of things of coming back together. And after meeting a few different guys and having a chat and all that sort of stuff, I ran into a guy called Gregor Kennedy. I don't know if many of you knew him, but he was probably one of my closest friends in year 12. And I was super excited to see him. And I went over to him at the pub and I was like, oh, Gregor, how are you going? And he just sort of said to me, oh, you know, P-Head, which was my nickname back then. And I said, oh, yeah, how are you going? He just said, you were so intense at school. And it floored me. Like, I was really looking for this, oh, yeah, it's great to see you. And it was like, you know, bang. And I went away, and that night, you know, it really shook me up. Now, I already knew a bit about my tension patterns and that, but just hearing someone say, recognizing it, saying, you were so, so intense and internalized. And one of the key things for me is, you know, I look back on my time, and one of the biggest difficulties wasn't so much what I went through or what happened, was I never told anyone. I never spoke to anyone. I never said, you know, to my mum or dad or anyone, that wouldn't talk to my friends. And that was one of the biggest difficulties, was this sense of internalizing my experience. And many of us, you know, can relate to that. We have an outer and sort of an inner. And so then I've really been on a journey from, you know, probably when I was 30, I got to the point where I'd done physio, but I couldn't keep up with my peers. I couldn't do that stuff. The low light for me was I got to the point when I had a partner and one child at that stage. I was working part-time as a physiotherapy assistant 2 days a week. And that was literally all that I could cope with. Anything more than that, and I was just in overwhelm. And I had chronic pain. I couldn't lift my arms above my shoulders because they were just all so tense. I couldn't run anymore because my calves had got so sore. I'd had chronic back pain at one point where I couldn't go up and down stairs because I had this sciatic pain and weakness and numbness in my leg. And what happened for me was I was using exercise and sport to get my endorphins to try to keep me happy. And around the age of, 30 or 35, I was really aware that it was like my body and my life were grinding down to a halt. And I remember ringing one of my brothers and saying, Bill, I can't do the things I used to do to keep myself happy, which was basically I couldn't keep exercising, because we know the benefit of exercise for mild depression. And so that was really a critical junction. Just what happened for me was I couldn't keep going how I was, and I was forced by my situation and my body to actually start to explore things and go inside myself and try to heal and that sort of thing. So that just gives you a bit of a background, and then I'm going to talk now about high functioning anxiety, which is just, it's a label, and it can be actually useful to have a bit of a sense of going, it doesn't have to be a diagnosis, but going, hang on, there's lots of us who have these similar sorts of things. Okay, and look, I love this image because the idea of going through life with the handbrake on, so much energy, but also something also holding us back in some way, shape or form. And I remember working with one of my eldest brothers, and he used to get really frustrated at me because he said, you've got so much potential and you've got so much skills and talent, but you're just not using it. And it was really clear for me. I'm going, yeah, but there's something else. I used to think, yeah, but I've got all this emotional overwhelm and stuff that means that I can't yet use those skills. So here's a picture of the Year 9 boarders back in 1985. And see if you can guess which one I was. Probably, you have a look around. And I'll make it very easy for you. I'm the one with the wet T-shirt, because I'd been sucking my T-shirt, which is a very common thing with kids with autism, and it's a soothing behaviour. Now, I didn't realise that, and it was only when, I might have been 30 or something, and one of my other brothers, James, said to me, oh my God, Rich, yeah, you were so stressed at school he said, do you remember that photo in year 12 where your T-shirt had all these holes in it? It's like, no, I couldn't remember. I went back and found it. I can't find it now. And I'd literally sucked holes in the center of my T-shirts because that was a way of trying to soothe me. And you can see, in the photo, there's kids there who are really chilled out and happy to be there. And I was really happy to be there, but you can see other kids are actually pretty stressed, but we often don't notice it. And so what happens when we have these states of high functioning anxiety is we kind of end up in this place where we've got two different realities. There's the outer us that we present to the world, and then there's what's really going on inside us. Now, of course, in that sort of boarding house environment, the last thing you can do is reveal vulnerabilities, because if they get revealed, they are the absolute point that people are going to prey on. And I would add, I was involved in that with other people as much as anyone else. So it wasn't like I was a victim of bullying. I was just a part of that entire culture. So I'm sure many of you can relate to this sense. We have the mask, or we put this on, and we put our face on, and we don't let people know we're stressed or we're angry or we're frustrated or whatever, in order to go out and fit into the world. And if you're like me, many people who feel like this have found that the COVID restrictions and lockdown have been a relief, because all of a sudden we don't have to always socialize. And there's some, I've got my family here, so I've got enough physical contact. And some of us are starting to go, you know what, I'm actually getting more stressed about going back into that normal life, because it often takes so much energy to meet the world when we've got this other stuff going on inside. Now, I also want to be really clear that often when we think about people who are highly anxious and highly functioning, we often think about the introverts, and this idea that we have this internal, we're thinking a lot, and we're, there's totally, the corporate world is very similar. Our environments, so many of our environments are similar and not supportive like that. So, we often have the thing of the high functioning anxiety is the kid who's withdrawn. But it can also play out for people who are extremely extroverted. And I can be like that, where I can be the life of the party, but internally I'm actually a bit stressed and anxious. So this topic and this idea of the different internal reality, it's not just about for those of us who are anxious and shrinking. Quite often, it's also involving people who are boisterous and over boisterous, because that's part of our coping mechanism. Now, as much as it's hard to see in other people, and you look at the photo of those kids, when we're young especially, but often for a lot of us, one of the key issues around this is we often don't even recognize how stressed we are. And I love this analogy of the iceberg, which is, like 15% is above the surface, and that's all the stress and the tension that we're consciously aware of and we're feeling. But, when it comes to our body, or even body language, 15% is verbal, or communication, 15% or whatever is verbal and it's language, and we're aware of it, we're thinking, and the other 85% is below the surface, and it's actually in our physical body that we're having all these responses, and they're often completely outside our awareness until 10, 15, 20 years, like happened for me with chronic shoulder and calf and back pain. Then the body starts to break down from carrying all these tension patterns. And then it's only then we start to go, hang on, what's the cause of this? Now, as a physiotherapist, when I had all these physical injuries, I was just like, it's all just a mechanical. It's because of this tight muscle and that tight muscle. And I had to go on a journey of understanding, why are these muscles tight? Why are my shoulders chronically held like this? What's the cause of that? There's an underlying stress, or even sometimes for lots of people, an unresolved trauma pattern. So this is where, if we only focus on what we're consciously aware of, we can often miss that inside and deeper inside us, we've actually got a whole lot of stress and tension that we're not aware of. Now, an interesting thing about being in these highly activated states of stress is, and it's a term that, it sort of sounds weird, being addicted to stress. However, when we're in a stressful or activated state, we could be, hyperactive and all boisterous, or we could be, defensive and anxious and charged up. Just to keep it very simple, our whole body gets flooded with neurochemicals, which actually start to activate our system, the classic kind of fight and flight response, which means we're also feeling much stronger and more powerful than we would if we're in a bit more grounded and relaxed stage, where we're feeling a bit more vulnerability. So for many people, what happens is we find that being in those highly charged, activated states feels normal and it feels comfortable, because to actually come out of those, it's a bit like puffing the feathers up as a bird. To come out of those states where we're being a bit bigger and stronger means we actually have to feel a bit more about what's going on. So it's also common for us to float through life just thinking, this is normal, this is my normal, I'm just someone who's very fast, I'm someone who's very boisterous, I'm someone who's very nervous, whatever it is, without actually touching in to what's underneath it. Now, here's some of the common symptoms, if you look up online, of people with high functioning anxiety. And the reason I like to call it high functioning anxiety, because many of us, this is not about people who are debilitated by their anxiety and can't do anything. Most of it is about highly functional people who are doing great things in the world. It's just coming at a massive internal cost unless we're aware of it and able to navigate it a little bit more. So see if you relate to any of these, and you're welcome to type something into the chat bar if you do. Perfectionism, worrying, overthinking, difficulties making decisions, racing thoughts, negative self-talk. Can anyone relate to this kind of stuff? We're at work, we're doing the project, we're doing the presentation, we finish the presentation, everyone says it's great, but we're like, oh my God, I didn't do that one thing that I was meant to do, and all that beating ourselves up. Difficulty slowing down, disturbed sleep patterns, difficulty saying no to people. Big one for me, overwhelmed by pressure. Social fatigue, happy going socializing, but I want to go home at 8 o'clock after an hour. I've had enough. I'm already full. And then again, and they're more sort of behavioral, psycho-emotional things. And then a big one is chronic tension. And with the split in our Western medical model between mind, mental health, physical health, we often don't equate the chronic tension. What's actually underlying that? Why is my body bracing and squeezing? Now, here's another thing that you don't often hear about, is to consider, do you have HFA, high functioning anxiety? Not like you have it, but if you have these experiences, or do you actually have some HFA, high functioning anger? Now, that's not even a term or a concept, because it's often easy to say I'm high functioning anxious, because then I'm no threat to anyone and everyone feels sorry for me. If I say I'm a highly functioning angry person, no one wants to know us. And it could be highly functional frustration. But one of the things I love about this analogy is, I remember one day I was driving somewhere and I was running late. And I was driving along and I was like, my heart was beating and I was tense and I was trying to go faster. And then it occurred to me that I'm going, you know what? The speed limit here is 80 kilometres. There's often police up ahead. I physically can't make the car go any faster. But internally, I'm here, my heart's going faster, but it's not making any difference to what's happening on the outside. And it's a beautiful analogy how we often have these internal stuff going on, even though on the outside we look calm, relaxed, normal. People wouldn't even know that all this stuff is going on. And I remember when I went back to my 30-year reunion, and I kept telling all the people that I bumped into, I was like, this is a big deal for me to be back here, and I'm feeling feeling a lot's going on inside me. Most people were like, we had no idea. We thought you were loving it the whole time. And don't get me wrong, I did love lots and lots of it. But there's this sense that we often have this but we have this shell that we present to the world, whereas internally it's like the outside of the car looks like any other car on the road. But internally, we're white-knuckling it either out of frustration or out of anxiety. Now, something else I also want to mention here, because it's just too important not to, and I like the concept here of low-functioning anxiety. And this quote I heard once from Candace Pert, who is the author of Molecules of Emotion: depression is the stop sign of the soul. And it's such a profound thing, because in our medical model, we think anxiety is something different from depression. But it's all actually part of the same process, where in depression, we've got so much anxiety and internal pressure or anger or whatever it is, so much charge in our body, that to contain it is actually shutting us down and creating low energy. We feel like we've got low energy, but it's actually a highly internally activated state that we're often not even aware of. So one of the things about having these internal pressures is, how do we cope with them? And I've underlined here the word compulsive, because all of the things I'm talking about here are not wrong or bad, but it's just when they start to become habitual or they start to have negative impacts. So here's some of the main ones I have had throughout my entire life. Chronically thinking, which keeps me disconnected from what I'm feeling or sensing or the tension in my body. Chronic overeating. Now, I'm not massive overeating, but I so often feel when I'm stressed, as soon as I get frustrated or angry, bang, I'm starting to eat something. It calms me down. It helps. They're helpful, but it's just not necessarily so healthy. Social withdrawal, muscular bracing. For me, I talked about sucking my T-shirts. The other thing I've had at different times through my life is periods where I will pick, and I'll pick my skin or I'll pick something repetitive. It gets called a body-focused repetitive behavior. And part of the benefit of that is when you're doing this picking, you get dopamine because you're motivated, and then you kind of get that release of, dopamine. And so again, it's not necessarily wrong or bad. It's just not necessarily dealing with the underlying patterns. And as I mentioned, exercising. A couple of other things, and again, if you want to, you can type something into the chat, but I encourage you to think about what are the compulsive behaviors you use for coping. Competition, whether it's in sport or whether it's at work, whether it's socially, that sense of I'm in a fight or flight mode trying to move into domination, classic in guys. Sex and porn, and especially I just think I'm so glad I'm not a young boy growing up now with 24/7 access to porn on my phone. It's just ridiculous. And one of the things about that is that for me, when I was growing up, that was one of the few ways that I could physically release my tension. So if I kept eating or I did other things, it would often distract me and make me numb. But if I had sex or other ways of releasing, then I would get a physical release. And that was really one of the only ways I could feel like I could calm my system down. Other of us overworking, smoking, coffee, alcohol, all these natural, social media, thank you. Avoiding things, avoiding situations, avoiding people, socializing, actually chronically socializing, online gaming, drugs, whatever other things are there basically. So again, just think about, and it's not that any of these things are necessarily wrong or bad. It's just that there's often a compulsive nature that's happening towards them. Now, ultimately, this is really where the rubber hits the road, is that we can't contain this internal state forever. It takes so much energy and so much of our life force to hold what's really going on inside ourselves and containing it. Literally, if your body's got this stuff happening inside it, it's similar to if you need to go to the toilet, you've got the urge to urinate. How do you stop that from happening and being expressed? We can brace and we create muscular tension. But the longer you hold that pressure builds up and it builds up, doesn't it? Till eventually you've got to let go. It's got to let go. And so for a lot of us, what we find is, we have a midlife crisis or a midlife breakdown or a midlife breakthrough where this artificial is not quite the right word, but this shell or this sort of other socially acceptable self that we're putting out to the world on the outside, it just can't happen, and something needs to break through. And, what you see here is the classic thing of an aneurysm is no different, that there's so much pressure and tension in the system that eventually things start to break. And in our culture, again, we often think, midlife crisis is bad. A breakdown is really bad. And I heard a guy talking the other day, one of the guys who was one of the camp leaders at the Adelaide Crows, actually, who was doing the leadership group. And he said I went through a period when I was in my 30s or 35th, so I can't remember, he might have got divorced. He said, I call it a melt through. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, a meltdown sounds like everything's really bad. But he said, it was like a melt through. Yeah, I broke down. The old me, the shell of me broke down, but something else had to come through. Okay, so what I want to move on to is, there's all this stuff going on. We're all stressed. And the thing is, it doesn't matter what our stress is, whether it's because of high functioning anxiety, because of COVID lockdown, because you're worried about JobKeeper finishing. At the end of the day, the body and the muscular system just responds the same way. My muscles don't go, that's a psycho-emotional stress, I won't tense up. It still just tightens and we start to get tense. So I want to look at some of the things that we can actually do to find a little bit of freedom. And I love this I love this image, and it goes with, there's a beautiful quote from a young 26-year-old guy from America who also teaches this TRE stuff that I'll talk to you about later. And it's not his quote, but there's a great saying which says, we often don't realize how stuck we were until we've been set free. And that's so true for those of us who've got this internal stress that we've been containing and carrying around in our lives. It's often not until something happens, it's not until I look back, it was literally 30 years later that I went back to Xavier and I realized that I had been living in permanent hypervigilance, social anxiety, fear of social trauma, all those years with no idea. It was probably 10 years. It was only that I was lucky that my body broke down, that I had to deal with this rather than just, go down all the other paths that so many of us do. So I'm going to talk about 3 key things. Now, these are not the only things, but they're 3 really valuable things that have been major helps and benefits in my life. And I'm going to talk to you about soothing, sharing, and shaking. I did start with shushing, but my mate Andrew, who's on the call, he's giving me a hard time about it because I like to get it in the right palette with the shush. But soothing, sharing, and shaking have been really important in my journey. So the first thing is soothing. And now I've got this, some of you might have even done this. I've attended a couple of Nick DiMartina's Hour of Power that he's been doing through the Old Zabs network. And soothing is about finding ways to help us calm down and relax, basically. And so, Nick's not the only person, but the stuff that he was presenting was beautiful. Mindfulness, meditation, breathing techniques, movement techniques. So finding things that we can do, and there's so many great techniques out there. And if you're looking for something, I highly recommend, and if we can link to it afterwards, Davina, his Hour of Power stuff is great. It's free. It's ridiculously, could be paying hundreds of dollars for it, if not more. And there's a whole lot of great techniques. So I'm not going to go into those because you can get all that sort of information in other places. The second thing, though, I want to talk about is sharing. And this was a critical experience for me when I was, I'd moved back to Melbourne, I had a young child, and I joined a men's group. And I can't remember how I got there or what happened. And what was fascinating was that up until I walked into that group when I was about 33 or 4 or 5, I'd had lots of experiences of being in a group of men. Now, one of them was boarding school. The other ones were, football teams. The other one, group of men. The other one was cricket teams. The other one was drinking teams. And the other one was priests. Now, one of the things about all of those areas was generally there was nowhere for us to be vulnerable or open. I wouldn't come to footy and go, actually, I'm feeling a bit anxious about playing well this Saturday, or I'm a bit upset about any of that emotional vulnerability. It generally just doesn't get talked about. You go to the pub, how you going, mate? Yeah, good. Yeah, got divorced. Yeah, great. Let's have some beers. Come on, let's go and have some fun. That's not wrong or bad. It's really important. But we often really don't have genuine conversations as males and as men. And when I went to this sharing circle, I was like, oh my God, this is the first time in my life that I've been in a group of men where I felt really safe and secure to be myself and talk about whatever was really happening inside me rather than putting on the outer shell. And this is where I think something that's so critical is, when do we stop as males? Again, I'm saying this is primarily for men, but it's probably similar for women. When do we stop sharing what's really happening inside us? Because when we're a little boy, we still generally talk to our mum or a dad or, whoever our primary caregivers are. But once we get towards puberty, generally the sharing stops. We stop talking about what's happening inside us. And more often than not, do we have any models around us who are talking about this stuff? No. All the men we see, they all seem to have their shit together. They've got earning money. In the Xavier community, they're all making heaps of money. They're all highly successful. They're all running an organisation. Do we ever see many of them? And thankfully we do these days more. But we don't see often our own parents, our own fathers or uncles just actually revealing, I've actually got a few vulnerabilities. We often just don't get that modelling. And something like the AFL are doing, when was the last time you cried? What an amazing new thing to make this to bring this forwards. And also the other ones, like the classic thing, the Richmond Football Club, the Triple H, the honesty and the hero and the hardship, I think it was. So there's people seeing the value of this. And so that's where I think this is such a critical thing for us in terms of sharing, is to model for boys going in this transition to puberty where you don't want to talk to your mum about stuff, having male role models around. And I love this quote someone said to me the other day, a guy who runs something called the Campfire Project. He talked about helping boys become a man, not the man. And I know it's probably highly different, but when you're at an elite school where you've got people in the elite echelons of society, a lot of these guys are the man. And there's a real model to be elite and be amazing. And that's wonderful, don't get me wrong. But it often comes at a cost of not just going, hey, where do we fit in? Where do we, and where do we see men sharing? And some of the most beautiful things in my life have been involved in rites of passage. Recently, we ran one with some of the boys in my daughter's, who's in year 7, in their class and a few others. And one of the beautiful things we did is at the end, we got each boy went and stood up with his father standing behind him with his hand on his shoulder. And the rest of us in the group who'd been there for 2 days camping, all we did was honoured him. And we just said, these are the things we love about him. The boys are bawling their eyes out. The dads are bawling. But, the boys found it easier to talk, easier to cry, easier to be real and vulnerable. The people who are struggling with the dads, well, I've never done anything like this. I've never actually revealed that. So it's incredibly hard to help young boys become men if that aspect of malehood and being able to be real and honest and authentic and heartfelt is not something that we are modelling ourselves. It doesn't have to be about banging drums and, eating dirt for 3 days or doing all sorts of other stuff, or vision quests. I've done, a number of those as an older man, which is like an initiation. It's about modelling with older males what it is to be a happy, healthy and heartful man in all our glory and all our power and all our vulnerabilities as well. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, hey, that's interesting, men's groups, I've never touched into it, or if you're someone there who knows men, then here's an opportunity for you. Coming up in a couple of months' time, I'm part of an organising committee, and we're creating what we think is probably not really the first one, but one of the world's first online men's gathering. So this picture here is from Menergy, which is a men's gathering that I've been part of. I spent 3 voluntary years on the organising committee. It's been running for about 9 or 10 years, where we have about 200 men who come together up in La Cola, beautiful environment. We have workshops, all sorts of stuff. And for me, this is one of the happiest times of my life, because I always say to people, it's drug, alcohol, and ego-free. You can come there and be yourself. You can reveal your vulnerabilities and feel the love and support of your brothers, rather than going, everyone's going to laugh at me and think I'm a dickhead, or I've got to put on a front. So if you're interested in exploring some of this stuff, then I highly recommend that you jump onto the Facebook group, Online Men's Gathering. It'll run for 3 days, but you can come and do 1 thing, 2 things, whatever you want. It'll be pay what you can. And it's a beautiful way, and there will be some sharing circles online. It's a beautiful way to actually step into that environment. And so if you're someone who's had a lot of that internal self is very different from what I'm letting other people see, and when you share that with the world, you're going to get smashed often. Having other people around who are wanting and actually calling for you to bring your heart forward is incredibly empowering. So please think about checking that out. Now, the third of the S's I'm going to talk to you now about is shaking. And so absolute major turning point in my life was when I was struggling and looking for things. I started doing, one of my eldest brothers had done a lot, and he recommended go and do some meditation courses. And I did a number of 10-day Vipassana silent meditation courses. And the first one I did was just like sitting on a carving knife for 10 days. It was the most painful thing in my life. And I was trying to meditate, and I was trying to get the pain to go away. And then at one point, I just gave up. I literally just thought, I can't do it. And all of a sudden, the pain just seemed to relax. And then, of course, I was trying to get the pain was back. But it got me started, and so I did a few more of these. And on my 3rd course, I was meditating at one point, and my conscious mind was kind of relaxing. I was just observing, and in Vipassana, you're just purely paying attention to the sensations in your body. And as I was sitting there, I noticed that my body started to rock forwards. And I was like, that's weird. I'm not doing this. And then it was just about to tip forwards. I started to think, oh my God, I'm going to fall over. And then it jolted. And then it started to move backwards. I was like, oh my God, that's just, and then it went all the way back. And I thought, I'm just about to tip over, and it moved forwards. So I had this experience that my body was starting to move. Now, any of you've done a lot of meditation will often feel your body start to shake or move or tremor. And what do we all get told? Sit still. What happens when you've got a 15-year-old son who's sitting at the dinner table and his legs going up and down? What do you all say? For God's sake, stop it. Because we just think it's annoying or whatever. Now, in the Vipassana, you're not allowed to move. You've got to sit still. So what I did was I snuck back into the hall one night, really offensive to us. And as I meditated on my arm, I put my awareness on my arm started to spin and move. And remember, I couldn't lift my arm above my shoulder. And all of a sudden, my arm would spin up in one direction, and it would go as far as it could, and then it would twist, and then it would come back to the other direction, and it would go as far as it could, and then it would twist, and each time it would go a bit further. And this shoulder that I hadn't been able to lift my arm above my shoulder for 5 years, all of a sudden at one point, my body had me upside down with my hand on the ground, with my feet on the wall, like a handstand with my feet on the wall, and I could press my body weight up and down as easily as I wanted. So everything I'd been told in my physio degree about strength and all that sort of, it all kind of went out the window. And as I let my awareness come onto both my arms started moving, and then in my legs, everything. So my body just started to twist and roll around the room. And it was the most extraordinary, ecstatic, incredibly pleasurable experience. Now, at the same time, it was also pretty wild and woolly, because as my body was moving, so was my mind. So I was going into a pretty altered state. And then when I then caught up with my family, they were like, oh my God, you've had a breakdown, you've gone completely manic, you've lost the plot. And part of that was true, don't get me wrong. There was a lot of stuff going on. But something inside me just felt like, you know what? I keep listening to the meditation teachers, and he's saying, sit still. And then he plays this tapes, and Buddha says, just observe. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go with Buddha. So I just kept observing, and I had months and months literally of going into these deep meditative states, and my body unwinding. And all of a sudden, this body that was just so chronically tense and painful my whole life was just starting to feel free and wonderful and incredibly amazing. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm still like that now, because I had to be in a very altered state of taking my conscious mind out, a little bit like anyone who, we drink or take drugs and we can dance like crazy and we're free and we've let go of our inhibitions. But when I came back to normal life, I was like, hang on, I've still got a whole lot of inhibitions here that I have to free up. But at that point, I didn't have any model for it. Now, all my family and culture was saying, you've just gone crazy, you've gone out of control. And it wasn't until about, 10 years later, my friend Andrew, who's hopefully still watching if he hasn't hung up, gave me a DVD. He said, check this out. This is really cool. It was a 10-hour DVD. I did some exercises, and I got this tiny little shake in the muscles inside my legs. And I thought, interesting. And then I went to sleep, and I slept like I hadn't slept for 40 years. And I remember getting up in the morning and sitting, and my heels felt like they were through the ground. And I knew in that moment, I was like, I'd done Pilates, I'd done, massage, I'd done stretching, I'd done everything to try and release my calves. And I was like, this is doing something that nothing else that I've tried had been able to do. And when we think about spontaneous movements, we all can relate to it. Like, have you ever been public speaking and your hands shake? Yep. What do? You stop it, because you think it's a sign of fear and anxiety. Have you ever had a car accident or seen someone who's had a car accident shaking? What do? Oh my God, they're in shock. We've got to stop that. For the women out there, have you ever had a baby and either during or after the birth, your body starts shaking? What do? Get your warm blanket. You're in shock. You're cold. We've got to. In our Western culture, we have completely misunderstood this shaking and tremoring reflex. We think that it's a sign of stress and anxiety and nerves and shock and a panic attack. And it's not. It's often associated with it, but that shaking and tremoring is not helping us to fight or to flee or to freeze. It's how the body is discharging and releasing the adrenaline and calming the system down. Now, I'm going to show you a little video here. And the background of this story was I was at the bakery when I first started learning theory. A guy came to the bakery, tied his dog up and went inside. We were at a park, went inside to go and get a coffee, and the dog started doing this. So you can see the legs shake, and it's we go, why is it yelping? It's anxious. And that's the question. Why am I shaking? Because I'm anxious. But let's ask a better question. What is the shaking actually trying to achieve? What's the point? What's its purpose? Now, first of all, the dog doesn't think, oh my God, why are you filming? Why am I shaking? Have I got MS or Parkinson's? It just lets it happen because it's not worried about that. And as it lets it happen, just watch what happens. It's got this urge to run to find its owner, to get away from the isolation. And you notice that the shaking starts to slow down. And then eventually, the dog sits down. The yelping has stopped. It's still a bit tense, but it's calmer. So from a stress or a trauma release model, this is all you need to know. The shaking and tremoring is not a part of being anxious. It's not a part of being panicked. It's how your body is letting that panic, that anxiety, that stress, could be anger, because we can shake when we're angry. It's how the body is letting it go. It's all you really need to know. And that's one of the things I love about my job is I just say, hey guys, this thing that we all experience naturally, it's not actually a bad thing. This is actually part of the solution, not a symptom. Now, if you're like me, you will have all been brought up thinking that we've got, when we look, this is just very brief bit of neuro education here, that we've got this nervous system and an autonomic nervous system. We've got sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and balance is in the middle. It's not actually accurate, because all the latest research and science shows us we actually have these three different states of the nervous system. Calm and relaxed is the engaged state. Mobilization, fight and flight, anxiety, anger, stress. But an even more highly activated state is an immobility state, where we have to then contain that. We have the anxiety, but I have to put a face on. I have to contain it. I can't be angry and snappy because I'll lose my job. I can't be stressed and anxious because people make fun of me at boarding school. I can't reveal. So we contain that. And how do you contain movement? With muscular tension and bracing. And in a trauma model, we call it the freeze response or the flop response. But in a life model, we call it containment, where there's something inside us. And it's not necessarily always anxiety and fear. It could be, you know what, I want to sing. Oh, I want to express. I want to tell jokes. I want to dance. But, you know, somewhere in there at school, I did that and someone laughed at me, and now it's contained. So it's just as much about releasing our authentic self and our voice as it is about healing from stress or trauma. Now you can see here, and sorry, one more thing, and that's where depression fits in, is in that immobility response. It's containing and shutting us down. It's a survival mechanism containing what's really happening underneath us. And this is where the shaking and tremoring and the spontaneous movement comes back in, because how do you release muscular bracing? Something has to move. And that's what the shaking and tremoring does. And it dumps the adrenaline, it releases the muscular bracing, and it calms us back down. And of course, if we suppress that, every time we get anxious and we shake and we suppress it, we prevent ourselves from actually letting our physiology and our internal reality relax. I've talked about that. Who hasn't experienced shakes and tremors while you are at the gym? What happens? Oh, it's a sign of weakness. At yoga, Pilates, a lack of control. And it partly is, but it's also a doorway to this deeper spontaneous movement. And TRE, which was originally a trauma release process, but it's now a huge process which is spreading around the world. Estimated 5 million people have already learned it in 60 countries, purely spreading by word of mouth. And what we do now is we teach people, we reframe it, we say, look, this shaking and tremoring is a positive thing. It's going to help your body relax and feel healthier. We teach you how to activate it so you can deliberately allow the shaking. We teach you how to regulate it so the shaking is you're in control of how much and when you let it happen. And then we teach you how to integrate the journey that it takes on, because often when we go into the body, we often start to feel more. We often have to feel more before we have to get better at feeling before we start to feel better. And sometimes it'll take us into stuff that we've been avoiding our whole lives. Now, the magic of TRE, I'll come to in a minute. I'm going to show you a video. This is what some of the shakes and tremors, if you haven't seen the videos online. So these movements here are all completely spontaneous and involuntary. So you can see here the woman's pelvis is rocking, and then it's starting to free up into her chest. And over time, over like a day or learning to practice or a workshop or over weeks, months and years, the body will tend to get more free, just like an animal coming back to life by shaking after hibernation. So you can see her chest and the neck still quite stiff. Here she is, I think this was either the afternoon or the next day. Now her chest is starting to relax. Her neck's starting to free up. So you might think, well, so what? This means she can breathe better. There's more freedom in her physical body. As we feel calmer and healthier in our body, we're naturally better people. We're naturally nicer. We're not as stressed. We're not as angry. We're more relational. Now, everybody tremors in their own unique and individual way. And sometimes you might have movements all through the body, and the body determines what's happening. So again, these people are simply lying down and letting this process happen. Small movements can be just as profound as big movements, so it's not about how big the tremor is. And it's not always about releasing stress. It doesn't have to be scary or dangerous or always about traumatic. And you can see this woman, her left shoulder starts to move, and she actually finds it quite amusing. Now, when you're doing TRE, if that was happening and you felt like you were out of control, you just stop and have a break, so we teach you how to regulate it. Now, you can see how her arm's getting involved, but her shoulder's not yet moving. And over time, as the body unwinds this pattern, now you can see her whole shoulder and her neck tension patterns are starting to get relaxed and released over time. And that happens in a session or over weeks, months, and years. And if at any point you need to, and this is a big part of the tremoring process, is learning that even though it's involuntary and you learn how to let go and let it happen, you can regulate it and stop and control it. So now she's consciously moving her arms and bringing her session to a close. Because our body and our organism wants to get us back to a calm, relaxed, and the most optimal, efficient, and effective state. Now, Davina or Catherine, I'm aware that it's 8:27. I've only got about another, I reckon, not too long, 6 or 7 minutes. Are you happy for me to just to keep going? If people need to leave, they can, of course, jump out. Are you okay if I just keep going for a bit?
Absolutely. And I think in the information that I've sent out, there is the video, and I don't know whether people have had the chance to look at it, but hopefully now with the background, they can go and look at that. And obviously they can reach out to you at any stage. So, by all means, another 6-7 minutes is fine. And if you do have to go, thanks for joining us. And if you don't, we'll see you in 6 or 7 minutes.
And if you do have to go, don't leave yet, because there's 2 minutes left. And what I'm going to do is kick forwards, because the most important takeaway from this is that if this is of interest to you, or if you have high functioning anxiety, if you have any level of stress in your life or your body, this is an absolute game changer. It doesn't replace all those other things we do, but it will support and enhance them. But it's going to help you let go of stress and tension. Sorry, let me go back. It's going to help you let go of stress and tension that you can't consciously yet relax. You know, again, it's like the iceberg. There's the stress that we're aware of, but right now I'd say, I want you to relax the tension in the middle part of your back, in the spine, where that vertebrae has never moved for the last 45 years. You can't even feel that it doesn't move. And even if we're sitting here going, I feel fantastic tonight, if we get someone to come and push into our body, we've got trigger points of muscles that are bracing and holding like buggery. And that's costing us energy and life force and freedom. So one of the magic things and the point of difference about this technique is it supports and enhances everything else we do, because just about everything we do, mindfulness, exercise, behavioral things, the way we think, it's all done consciously. We know how effective that is, but by adding this in, your body is able to let go of stress and tension and reconnect you in ways that you can never do consciously. So if this is of interest to you, the important takeaway is you can actually learn this for free. I've created a free online course. It's 3 sessions. It's about 3 hours. If you go to treaustralia.com, there's links there, and it's a free resource that I've created with thanks to the Australian government and JobKeeper. So when I lost 90% of my income because all my workshops and training had stopped, I've created this free course. So it is a resource there for you. And please, for anyone else you know, it is there to be shared, to introduce people to this, because it's really a birthright. It's birthright knowledge that we should know. Now, those of you who have to go at 8:30, you can go. Those of you who want to stay around. So I've talked a lot about stress and tension, but I also, in the Xavier community, heaps of sport, lots of elite performance, not just sport, but it could be any kind of elite performance. This technique and similar tremoring techniques are being used by elite athletes. There are AFL footballers, Olympic athletes, professional surfers who are using this and similar techniques to enhance their performance and recovery. Now, and just to show you how simple it is, here's a group of guys from the Greater Melbourne Volleyball Academy that I've been working with for a few years. And these guys are elite volleyballers who are going to go to college and onto professional volleyball careers. And here they are at the end of their training session, lying on the floor, allowing their body to reset. Now, what's one of the big problems we have in the AFL? How do the guys unwind after performance? No dose. How do people unwind after the amateurs football performance? Beer. Not to say any of those things are necessarily wrong or bad, but this is something which is completely natural and is helping them to not just recover and reduce training soreness, but to help them get to sleep and sleep better. Now, part of the magic here is, anyone got teenage boys? If you tell teenage boys it's time to do mindfulness meditation and to calm down and relax their stress, what are you going to get? No, really, I just want to go and kick the footy and play better. Doing it like this and introducing it, this is going to help you recover better. It's going to help your mind state, so you're getting the peak performance flow states. This is a magic way of introducing this technique because it's stigma-free. You don't have to talk about your emotions. You don't have to talk to anyone. You can lie down, and if you want to be talking to people, you can. So this is, again, an absolute game changer of introducing this understanding about the tension we have in our bodies, even if it's just relevant to sport and optimizing sport. It starts young men and potentially young women on this journey of learning more sense of self-regulation and self-mastery. So hopefully that gives you a couple of things: soothing, sharing, and shaking. 3 simple things you can do. And why I'm so passionate about this, having done this journey on my life, I've still got a long way to go, but I'm such a different person from where I was 20 years ago. And I'm so grateful for what I went through to have that journey so I can help empower others in that same authentic journey of finding our authenticity. And as I say, it's not just about letting you know how anxious I am. It's actually about letting you know how proud I am, or how skillful I am, or how clear I am, or my ability to provide information. Or it's not just about getting rid of stress. It's about becoming more authentically ourselves. And the reason I'm so passionate about it is because people with highly sensitive and highly tuned nervous systems, we have great capacity to be extremely high performing. But just like a Formula One car, those things don't get out on the track just with the local mechanic every 6 months. They have a massive team of people around there to keep tuning that. And for a lot of us with these nervous systems that are so finely tuned, we need to have upkeep. And when we're working well, we can hum and we can soar. Again, similar to people like a violin, those of us who have these very highly strung nervous systems. Now, the violin can be an incredibly sweet sounding instrument when we're tuned well and we feel good inside ourselves. But if you've ever had kids learning violin or stringed instruments, when it's not in tune, it's horrendous and it's the worst thing. It's the same for us. When I'm stressed and anxious and overwhelmed and not looking at, I'm a terrible partner. I'm a terrible parent. I'm a terrible dog owner. I'm terrible at everything. Not getting better. But when we are getting connected to ourselves, we can make this beautiful, beautiful music in our lives and in our world, and also in our relationships. And at the end of the day, that's what's been the biggest thing for me is, ultimately, if I can become a better dad and a better partner and a better pal and a friend, a good friend to my friends, and also a better pet owner, because my dog has been the thing that's brought out my high functioning anger more than anything when the dog won't do what I want. That's really at the end of the day what it's about. And so hopefully what you take away is this talk is not just about ourselves, but it's also about those other people around us. We all know partners, fathers, mothers, daughters, sisters, sons, nephews, who can all benefit from being supported to be more real and authentic in what's happening, so they can live more full and free and happy lives and contribute and help all of us to feel more happy and free and connected.